and Roger had a old shotgun that he always wanted to shoot a chicken hawk. That was bothering the neighbor's chickens, so we marched through the woods looking for the chicken hawk, and Roger kept opening the rifle all the time, or the shotgun all the time, and make sure the shell was still there. And finally we got to a place where there was a hawk up in the tree. He pointed the gun up to the tree and pulled the trigger, and it went click. And so consequently, when he was checking this shotgun shell being in the gun, it ejected when he didn't see it. So the hawk took off, and that was it. It was one of the thrilling days.
So I was thinking about when Daddy used to say things like, don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes, then shoot lower. And how that would roll into Daddyisms, you know, how he kind of created his own little sayings around things. So that was one of them. Oh, and that made me think about when the nurses came over and they would say, you have a really good daughter, and you'd say, yeah, good for nothing. It was probably like when he said, you're my favorite kid, but don't tell anyone. I'll have to deny it.
He used to tell me, hey, you're pretty handy. That's what he used to call me all the time. You're a handy guy. And he'd call me every time he had a little minor repair. I'd go over and fix it for him. And I'd always get a story every time I'd go over there. You know, I could, a subject would come up and he'd have a story for it. I'd mention some of his art and he'd have a story for it. One day he told me to sit down. He says, you know, I know a lot of people who call me Roger, but my friends call me Rod. And I've called him Rod ever since.
have many fabulous memories of Mr. Lincoln. Victoria and I have been friends since we were 12, so I grew up with all the Lincolns. One memory stands out in my mind. It was 1977. Vicki and I had just started our senior year, and Mr. Lincoln said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" to me. And I said, I would like to be an airline stewardess. And in Roger fashion, he looked at me and said, "What in the hell do you want to be a waitress in the sky for when you could be the pilot?" And this was in 1977. He was a brilliant, forward-thinking man, and he will be missed.
Your father was a great man. Rod Lincoln was very intelligent, very caring. He had true grit. He gave me deep thinking ability. I would think differently about the world. I would open my mind to stories and to things in the world that I never would have before had I not known him. Hearing his stories about throughout the world and asking about the sunsets and about the people and about the cultures and everything, it was just remarkable. And as many of you feel, you got to go along with him in some ways, and some of you did. So you're the really lucky ones.
Uncle Roger, when he first started out, was doing work mostly at Fort Lewis. He worked out of his house for the first few years and then finally rented an office. He'd go up the corner, a little cafe for coffee every morning and go to work. In 1953, Lincoln Construction was incorporated. And since then, we've done thousands of jobs, mostly schools, state work, government work, county, cities. We've had the best of times and we've had the worst of times. But in the end, it averaged out to be the best of times.
Uncle, he was always willing to help a person out. A couple of times he was called in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and he would come down to sometimes the Sumner jail, middle of the night, lived in Spanaway, didn't care how far it was, and he would bail a person out of jail. He was a touching uncle. I know I'm going to miss him. And then I had many good hunting trips with him. The problem with that is he could sneak up on a deer before it ever got out of its bed and harvest it. Usually he'd see the horn sticking up or moving, and he'd catch these deer. And in a party of like 6 hunters, he'd probably get 3 of the deer. So he was very good at going through the woods like a stealth bomber.
Rod and I traveled a lot, and we didn't do we did touristy things, but Rod was one who liked to see how the real people lived in the backwoods. Traveling with him was an experience because we slept in tents in India with clay floors, and they brought hot boiling water at 5:30 in the morning so we could bathe. And the trip on the Rio Negro was in a little flat-bottom boat with a room probably about the size of a very small guest bathroom. And when you got up in the morning, you had to pick the little green frogs off the toilet and throw them in the river so you could sit down. Whenever anybody met Rod, he'd say, "Well, how are you today?" And he'd say, "Meaner than hell." And if people didn't know him, they kind of backed off for maybe 10 or 15 minutes and then ended up loving him. Yeah. And so he has a lot of friends all over the world that remember him, meaner than hell. I'm so lucky to have had Rod be a part of my life for all these years. I will miss him forever.
He knows a little bit about everything. I shouldn't say a little bit. He knows a lot about a whole lot of things. And so it was always so nice to go to a different country with him because he knew the history of it. And to see him enjoy the foods or the different wines. It was spectacular, spectacular times.
And at skiing, he would take us to the top of the restaurant at Crystal Mountain for lunch. That was the big highlight of the day. So one time we were up there having lunch, and there was a whiteout. When we got our skis on, he decided we would go around the back of the restaurant and go down the cat tracks on a wider trail to get down. And it was a complete whiteout. And so he goes around
Chicken shot.
Yes, he goes around the backside, and because it was such a whiteout, he went right over the side. And one kid after another went right over the side, right on top of him. Boom. Another kid, boom.